Good morning, friends. Whether you're in the room or watching us online, we're super glad, excited, honored that you'd spend some of your morning with us here on Sunday. And just a great morning of worship so far. And we are in week 5 of this Minor Prophets with a Major Message series. And I hope that it's been some meaningful study for you. I'm guessing that you probably have not spent a lot of time in some of these often overlooked books like Zephaniah and Micah and Joel, or the book that we're focusing on today, Amos. And really the truth is I'm not all that different than you are. When I hear the name Amos, this minor prophet is not the first thing I think of. The first thing I think of is typically a small snack-sized bag of famous Amos chocolate chip cookies, which, if I'm honest, are at least once a day a staple when I'm in Jamaica on our mission trip doing basketball camp. It's afternoon, get me through kind of deal, at least once a day. So that's the first thing I think of. The second thing I think of is, again, not the book of Amos, but a small black Cocker Spaniel that I found and adopted my senior year of college. A great little dog, although I lost an entire room of carpet in the dorm because of this little dog that was not house trained. And honestly, I'm a college student. What do I know about house training a dog? And but it's a great little dog. Loved that little dog. Had him for several months until a few weeks before graduation. He got out and he was hit by a car. And I was not there in the moment, but I was there right after I found him, and I had my hand on his chest as he took his last breath. And we scooped him up and took him, and through the comedy of errors that followed, I had to bury him twice. Can't get it right the first time. I guess you try again. So, and I could say that the emotional and psychological trauma of those events has been what has kept me for 30 years from returning to this book of Amos. But that wouldn't be true, and you know it. The reality is I've read Amos a few times, a little here and there over the years, but really not very much. And the truth is that these minor prophets, Amos and the others, they're easy to skip over and to miss. They only take up a few pages each in the Bible. Some of them have weird names. I've yet to meet anybody in my 50 years of life named Zephaniah. So, weird names. They talk about places and kingdoms that we really don't know much about. They're heavy and negative, filled with talk of judgment and sin and wrath. And they seem like they're pretty much all the same. It's kind of like, hey, great, 6 weeks of this series. Oh, it's pretty much the same message. These guys are really sharp. Which, in some respects, that's true. They're all messages that come through a messenger, from God, through a messenger to people, calling them out for their unfaithfulness to him and pronouncing judgment and punishment that's coming because of it. But the thing is that when we skip over these little books, we miss out on hearing God's loving challenge through grace and truth. And we miss out on the consistent story of God's relentless pursuit of us in relationship with his people and the restoration that he wants to bring. And the Bible Project videos that we've been watching have done a great job of framing up these books. So we really don't need to spend a lot of time kind of reviewing and digging into the historical context. Just a reminder of what we heard and kind of what's taking place and who it's being said to. So Amos, as the video told us, was a shepherd, just a simple shepherd from the southern kingdom of Judah, who has been sent to the northern kingdom of Israel, now home of 10 of the 12 tribes of Israel, of God's chosen people. And after highlighting the sins and judgment on Israel's neighbors, through Amos, God lays out his charge against his people, the nation of Israel. And he says this, he says, I chose you and only you. I made a covenant with you and I made you my people. I rescued you. I went ahead of you. I destroyed your enemies. I gave you a home. I raised up leaders. I helped you prosper. But you just rebelled against the leaders that I gave you, and you've rejected me time and again. And I've pleaded with you over and over to come back to me. I've disciplined you many times as a loving father does his child, but you won't listen and you won't return to me. So now I'm going to humble you. You see, the covenant relationship that God had with Israel is a great calling. And that great calling comes with great responsibility and with great consequences. Amos chapter 5, God says this to Israel: "There will be wailing in all the streets and cries of anguish in every public square. The farmers will be summoned to weep and the mourners to wail. There will be wailing in all the vineyards, for I will pass through your midst." In this message, God alludes back to the time in Egypt when he, the God who once passed over the Israelites, now would pass through them, just as he did to the Egyptians, and that Israel would know the same and experience the same kind of judgment that came on the Egyptians 600 to 700 years earlier. And the destruction, he says, would be so great that there won't be enough of the typical group of mourners. They'll have to call in reinforcements to mourn all of the loss that is going to come. He also says in chapter 4, "Hear this word, you cows of Bashan on Mount Samaria, you women who oppress the poor." Now, just for a moment. Guys, I want to make it clear. There's only one who can get away with calling women a cow, and that's God. You're not him. Don't ever try this language. But hear the language that God is using. "You cows of Bashan on Mount Samaria, you women who oppress the poor and crush the needy, and say to your husbands, 'Bring us some drinks.' The sovereign Lord has sworn by his holiness, the time will surely come when you will be taken away with hooks, the last of you with fish hooks. You will each go straight out through the breaches in the wall, and you will be cast out." I'm just saying, God ain't messing around. And so the question is, what is it that the people of Israel have done that generates so much wrath and anger from God? What could make God so angry to justify destroying an entire nation? It's really pretty simple. They've become a prideful people who abuse the abundance that God's given them. They oppress and neglect the poor and the weak, all the while going to their places of worship to perform religious acts and display how righteous they are. But God makes it clear to them that he doesn't care about their acts of worship as long as they continue to deny justice to the oppressed. Amos 5 says, God says, I despise your religious festivals. Your assemblies are a stench to me. Even though you bring me burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept them. Though you bring choice fellowship offerings, I will have no regard for them. Away with the noise of your songs. I will not listen to the music of your harps, but let justice roll on like a river, righteousness like a never-failing stream. God's message to the Israelites is, you can worship all day, every day. It doesn't matter until you honor me and you start treating the people around you with fairness and integrity and start caring for those in need. Your religion is meaningless to me, and I detest it and you. He hates their religious activity because it's insulting to him. Their acts of worship are totally disconnected from how they treat people. They sit around indulging in luxury at the expense of those who have very little. And he says, if you truly want to love and worship me, then you'll seek me and you'll seek justice for people who are helpless and exploited. Now, friends, I've got to tell you, this is a message that really bothers me. I've been reading and studying the book of Amos for several weeks, reading it over and over again, just asking God to allow the message that is within the book of Amos to just kind of rise to the top and bubble up. And I had the core of this message written and done several days ago. But through the end of the week, I just felt unsettled. I kept thinking that somehow it's not done. I know how many pages there should be to fit within kind of the time that we have here on Sunday mornings for messages, and it was the right length, and it was the things made sense, and all those kinds of things. But something was missing. Something felt like it just needed more time in the oven because it wasn't fully baked. And so yesterday morning, I went through it again, and I reflected on the weekend that I was in the middle of experiencing. This weekend has been a really good weekend. I've spent time at the pool. I've been to the art museum. I've been out to dinner with friends twice. While sitting at the pool on Friday, I was planning next week's vacation activities and places to eat. Though really, we call it a staycation because it's staying kind of local, as if that's not somehow as good as a real vacation. And those are the thoughts that struck me yesterday morning as I sat out on my screen porch in the comfort of my cushioned wicker patio furniture, sipping my warm cup of coffee in my nice Yeti mug that keeps it cold for several hours, or hot for several hours. Friends, there's nothing wrong with screen porches, art museums, pools, eating out, vacations, or Yeti mugs that keep coffee warm. Those comforts in and of themselves are not sinful, but they are nevertheless comforts. And what crystallized for me yesterday morning as I sat there reflecting, reading, and looking through the message again was this simple thing, that Amos's message is the same to us as it was to Israel, and that is this, that comfort has been and continues to be an enemy of justice. You see, at its worst, comfort can make us active participants in injustice, as it was with many in Israel. Our pursuit of greater comfort can easily turn into greed as we take advantage of others to get more comfort. Maybe it's not intentional, but we allow a system, a cultural system that creates injustices, and we take advantage of that system on a regular basis, whether we know it or not. In a less extreme but no less sinful version, comfort inoculates us and builds an immunity to the suffering and injustice of the world around us. And in our relative luxury, we become unaware or unconcerned with the need in our own backyard. And this is what's at the heart of Amos's message and indictment of Israel. They claim to be righteous and love God, but in their prosperity, their religion has not changed the way that they treat people. And the message of the book of Amos and all throughout Scripture is this: a real relationship with God will transform your relationship with others. Let me say that again. A real relationship with God will transform your relationship with others. You can't truly love God without loving others, and you can't love others without pursuing justice for them. Dr. Cornel West said it this way: justice is what love looks like in public. In other words, if you love someone, you don't want them to be treated badly. You care about how their life is broken, and you take action to see that their situation changes. As Christians, we share with Israel as God's covenant people. And despite our knowledge of Israel's history, we still have trouble with this message. And when we do think about justice, too often it's impotent and ineffectual because we lose focus on what really matters. I think there's at least 3 ways that our justice, our sense of justice gets out of focus. And the first one is that for us, many times we focus on the offender instead of the offended. When injustice occurs and right equitable relationship is broken, we look for someone to blame. And our attention has a tendency to shift to punishing the offender instead of restoring the broken. We talk about balancing the scales of justice, and it feels like by getting even, we somehow balance the scales of justice by punishing the offender. But what about when there's not someone to punish? What of justice then? You see, we can't always determine responsibility for injustice. And when our focus is on punishing the offender, we have to punish someone. And so in the absence of an offender who's clear for us to punish, we frequently end up punishing the wrong people, and everyone around us pays. Even when there is someone to punish, it doesn't always happen as we think it should. And so it does little, if anything, to restore what's broken inside the person who's been wronged, and it leaves them empty and still in search of justice. Justice that's focused on punishment will always come up short, and it will always leave us wanting. The second way that our justice gets out of focus is that we focus on changing the world instead of impacting a person. What starts out being about one person becomes a cause that we begin to champion. And our attention moves from this hurting person in front of us to the broken system that's out there somewhere. And our attention turns to bigger battles in a grander war, and we lose sight of the wounded one right in front of us. And a few things occur. Our attention and our energies get redirected and transferred to affecting change to the bigger issue. And we end up without having any energy or resources to devote to the individual level. Or the scope and the scale of the issue disconnects us from the problem. It becomes too distant, too far away from us in our own lives, and we become cold, apathetic, and unmoved. Or, as happens far too frequently, we get bogged down in arguments about what the real issues are and what are the best solutions. And the more in our culture that we move forward and the more that we engage in social media, the more guilty we become of this particular point. Every time I get on Facebook, which is becoming less frequently, but every time I get on, there is somebody debating some point of injustice and somebody else arguing about whether or not that's really the issue and what the right solutions should be. Or we get overwhelmed by the macro level issue and we think we're too small to make an impact. And so we get discouraged and we just disengage. Meanwhile, on the micro level, there's brokenness that goes unintended. I think in my lifetime, one of the places where I see this having happened, I can best see this having happen, is in what we refer to as the pro-life movement. For many years, a lot of conservative Christians focused a lot of their energies on opposing laws that permitted abortion. And I'm not critical of that idea of that being something that should be opposed. But we rallied and we stood in silent protests and we preached and we prayed and we campaigned. And paradoxically, some people even turned to violence to fight for life. But the counter-indictment was that those who were most vehement in their opposition to the legality of abortion did little to support or encourage young pregnant moms who found themselves suddenly overwhelmed, isolated, and frequently condemned. And so for years, it seemed like the impact of those efforts was losing ground. As abortion became more established and commonplace in our culture, many pro-life believers grew weary of the fight. And while they didn't change their view on the subject, they stopped giving their energy and their attention to it. And then people like our partners at Pathway to Hope Pregnancy Care Center in Hamilton began to flip the script. They began to help us ask the question, what would happen if we worked just as hard or harder to support and encourage vulnerable young moms and dads as we do opposing the legality of abortion? What if we focused our energy and attention on raising up a better option for them by providing support and resources that restore the broken pieces of their lives so that abortion doesn't feel like their only choice? They helped us look through a broader lens to see that there was more than just one life that needed to be fought for. And what I've become aware of is that in more recent years, we've begun to see a momentum shift, even across our culture. You see, when we focus on meeting the needs of individuals right in front of us, we will make an impact that contributes to changing the world around us. That's why we engage here at Centerpoint in missions partnerships. Our missions partnerships are not just good activities that you should be a part of. It's not something that we as a church leadership want to make accomplished, and we just need you to help us get our thing done. Our missions partnerships are about trying to bring together the broken pieces of people's lives and bring justice, God's justice and restoration into the lives of people that are broken. And it's about creating opportunities that are simple and easy for us as a congregation, for you as individuals to have the opportunity to step into being part of God's justice in the world. Because it's not always easy to see that. We hear a message about justice, and then what do I do with it? Well, missions partnerships are a great opportunity for that. You may not be able to reverse national laws or change societal attitudes about the legality and or the morality of abortion, but you can join our friends at Pathway to Hope in encouraging young moms and dads, maybe mentoring a young dad, maybe encouraging a young mom, maybe supplying resources that they need to come alongside them so that they no longer feel overwhelmed and they choose life and know the joy of being a parent and raising a family. And maybe, just maybe, in all of that, they find the justice of God and the restoration that comes in Jesus. You may not be able to eliminate poverty in your community, but what can you do to meet the needs of a person that's right in front of you? One of my friends here at Centerpoint, Lisa Cassidy, every month answers that question by leading our Stepping Forward team to be part of a program that provides a meal and life enrichment classes for families that need those things. Or Melina Siebert, who leads the Family Promise team to provide a home here in our facility for families several times a year, families that are financially broken and looking to find a new solid foundation. And so she rallies a team of volunteers to provide not only a place to stay, but meals and grace-filled relationship. You can join our friends at Reach Out Lakota. That's what the backpack drive is about this month. It's about bringing justice and bringing restoration into a broken piece of a child's life through providing what they need. Or you can partner with our friends at the Christian Family Center in Hamilton. You can join the efforts of some of our global partners in the Dominican Republic or Jamaica and other places by serving on a short-term trip or sponsoring a child to make sure that they get an education, nutritious meals, and that they hear about Jesus. Or you can just simply band together with other people that you know to meet the need of someone in your sphere of influence. Within the last 2 weeks, just in my sphere of influence, I've become aware of 2 people that have a desperate need for a dependable vehicle and 2 other people who have other financial needs. And I'm sure that, like me, you in your circle of influence, your sphere, in your neighborhood, in your place of work, in your friendships, in your family, I'm sure that you are, or you very soon will be aware of somebody who has a need. And maybe you're just able to meet it. Or maybe it's large enough that you can't meet it on your own, but you could rally your friends, fellow believers, or people who just have a good heart to meet that need and bring restoration in someone's life. What I'd say to you is this: just don't get caught being apathetic in your comfort or distracted in the political arguments about solutions to poverty. Friends, hear me. This is not about condemning people that God has blessed and condemning the fact that we have good things. Because economic justice isn't about condemning or punishing the wealthy, but it does require the wealthy to recognize the disparity between our level of comfort and the struggle of others and then do something about it. But justice isn't just financial. It's about the growing number of kids that are becoming functional orphans because their parents either are unwilling or unable to give them the care they need. And you can join efforts like our partners at Hope's Closet or the Father's House that we talked about, that you heard about in the Dollar Club story this morning. as they work to support the foster and adoptive community, to provide a home and a family for kids that need one. It's about the increasing tide of families that have kids with special needs that feel isolated, discouraged, and exhausted, quite frankly. You can engage in the lives of those families through programs like our one-to-one ministry, through our partners at Butler County Pause. Justice is about about people being treated equitably, regardless of their race or their gender. And you may not be able to eradicate racism or gender bias, but you can certainly do something to give respect and elevate someone who deals with these issues on a daily basis. Justice is about supporting your coworker who's been unjustly penalized, or being a refuge for a kid at school who gets bullied and ridiculed and ignored. You may not be able to bring justice to everyone, but you can bring justice to someone. Andy Stanley said it this way: do for the one what you wish you could do for the many. Do for the one what you wish you could do for the many. The third way that our sense of justice gets out of focus is that we focus on what's deserved instead of what's needed. When we focus on justice as getting what we deserve, we establish a standard. It starts out as an inward standard, and usually that what we deserve has a positive connotation when we think about ourselves. What is it that I deserve? I deserve better than this, is one of the statements that you might hear, or you might even say to yourself. We think about justice, about what we deserve. But when we set that standard for ourselves inwardly, we're also establishing a measure by which we decide what someone outside of ourselves should get and what justice looks like for them. And here's the problem. The problem is that we have a tendency to overestimate what we deserve and to underestimate what others deserve. And we implement a brand of justice that ends up being mixed with judgment. But the justice that God calls us to is justice that's mixed with mercy. While the world looks at justice through the lens of retribution and reimbursement, Jesus looks at justice through the lens of redemption and restoration. Several months ago, when I was here on stage and sharing, we talked about the story of the Good Samaritan that's found in several of the gospel accounts, and in Luke 10 in particular. And it's a story that we're fairly familiar with. Even if you're not super familiar with church, you may have heard the story of the Good Samaritan and know the concept. But the story that Jesus told about a man who's been on a journey, a Jewish man on a journey. He gets robbed, beaten, and left for dead by the side of the road. One at a time, two Jewish religious leaders pass by him. They see him, but they choose to avoid him for their own reasons. And then after some time, a third individual comes by, a Samaritan. Samaritans and Jews were enemies of one another, but yet this Samaritan, who is a cultural outcast and rival to the Jew, chooses to stop, to care for the Jew, to put him on his donkey, to take him to an inn, to pay for his care, and then to promise the innkeeper that he will come back and settle up the account for whatever is needed to care for this man. Let me ask you this. What if instead of the story the way Jesus told it about the Samaritan, what if the Samaritan's response had been to go find the robbers and see that they were punished for the crime that they committed? Or what if his response was to go and to fight against crime, working to create safe passage for all travelers on a notoriously dangerous road? Or what if the Samaritan's response had been to determine whether or not the wounded man actually got what he deserved for being foolish enough to travel by himself on a notoriously dangerous road? You see, Jesus taught us to see brokenness and see justice through the lens of restoration. He taught us that loving God and loving others, that those things are inseparably linked. And that loving others means having an awareness of and taking action to fix what's broken. This was filled throughout his teaching, but it was also throughout his life and the way that he lived. Throughout the Gospels, we see stories of Jesus encountering people in situations where he looked and he said, this just isn't right. And he took action to engage, heal, revive, and restore. Time and time again, Jesus focused on the person in front of him. Jesus didn't heal everyone who had an illness, but he healed the ones that were right in front of him. Jesus didn't cast the demons out of everyone, but he did it and freed the people that were in front of him. Jesus taught us to focus on restoring what's broken in the lives of the people in front of us. He viewed justice through a lens of not of punishment that was deserved, but through the lens of restoration that was needed. Friends, it would all play out very differently if Jesus had viewed justice through the lens of what we deserve. Don't get me wrong, there's a time for accountability. There's a time for punishment and reward according to what's deserved. But thankfully for us, there was a time when Jesus focused on mercy rather than punishment. When he focused on what we needed rather than what we deserved. When he focused on restoration rather than restitution. You see, once and for all of us, at the cross, he resolved the greatest systemic injustice that mankind has ever known or will ever know. The brokenness of our relationship because of our sinful lifestyle of rebelling and rejecting God. When our relationship was broken, he brought us reconciliation. When no one else was able, he could. When no one else was willing, he would. And when no one else intervened, he did. He did for the many what was needed for each one. And friends, that is what makes him worth loving. That is what makes him worth following. So friends, if you're someone who you wear the name Christian, it's not just a label that you carry. It means that you are a follower of Jesus. You follow in the way that he lived and you follow in what he taught. So my question for you is, where is the brokenness around you? Where is it that God looks and says, it's just not right? And what he's calling us to is for you and for me to step into that spot and be his agent of justice by bringing the broken pieces of life back together. And if you're someone who doesn't yet follow Jesus, I just want to say to you, friends, you will never have the brokenness of your life fully restored, put back together. You will never know the full joy, satisfaction, peace, and the kind of hope that's spoken of at the end of each of these prophetic books. You'll never know that in its fullness until you recognize and you submit to the idea that Jesus is the one and the only one who can bring the brokenness of your life back together. In a few moments, we're going to take communion together like we do each week. And the ushers are going to pass some trays with some stacked cups that'll have some bread and some juice, and you can take a stack of those cups and you can reflect. And if you're a believer, reflecting on how God has restored your brokenness and what might he be asking you to do. And as we take communion together and remember, celebrate what Jesus has done for us at the cross, let's be thankful. But let's be thankful in a way that our gratitude causes us to move, to bring the justice of God through the lens of restoration into the world around us. Let's take communion together.